Yeah, this one's for Caiden, strong and true. Caiden's corner, built for me and you. Inclusion's the mission, together we rise. Every kid matters, you can see it in our eyes. From the field to the block, building dreams brick by brick. Caiden's corner's here, and the love is legit. Caiden's got heart, he's paving the way. Autism's his story, but it don't rule the day. Families united, we're stronger as one. Supporting the struggle, enjoying the fun. Inclusion's a mission, together we rise. Every kid matters, you can see it in our eyes. From the field to the block, building dreams brick by brick. Caiden's corner's here, and the love is legit. Minecraft worlds where the sky's the limit. Creativity shines and Caiden's right in it. Every child's voice, every laugh, every cheer. Caiden's corner stands strong, we belong right here. C-A-I-D-E-N corner. Inclusion, support, let's build it stronger. Built together we shine, no one left behind. Caiden's corner forever, community aligned. Inclusion's the mission, together we rise. Every kid matters, you can see it in our eyes. From the field to the block, building dreams brick by brick. Caiden's corner's here, and the love is legit. Inclusion's the mission, together we rise. Every kid matters, you can see it in our eyes. From the field to the block, building dreams brick by brick. Caiden's corner's here, and the love is legit.
Our first speaker is one of the people that he was talking about. So we have Alyece Smith with us today. She's a business coach, autism advocate, and founder of Caiden's Corner, which is a nonprofit dedicated to supporting families with sensory-friendly events and community resources across South Mississippi. She is also the author of What Now Mama, a heartfelt guide offering emotional support and practical tools for parents navigating the early days of an autism diagnosis. As a mom of a neurodivergent child, Alyece is passionate about using storytelling as a form of healing, advocacy, and connection. She also hosts the ADHD CEO podcast and mentors neurodivergent women building freedom-based businesses. So we could not be more happy to start our morning off, as she is a very vibrant woman that's going to get kicked off this one. So please,
Thank you. Thank you all for having me today. And I'm just really excited to be here. CASA's always been just a staple in our little community in Hancock County. And of course, over the last several years has just grown astronomically. So I am grateful to be here today. And to be honest, I was getting a little choked up over there in the corner because just hearing and seeing my kids on the screen. I've got one missing. I've got a 19-year-old that doesn't want to be photographed any longer unless he's actually the one taking it. But just getting a little worked up because this is so important and I'm so passionate about it. And there's a lot in the news right now around autism. We won't get political, but you've probably had a lot more questions lately about what are they saying and is this true or is this accurate? So my goal for today is to really explain how this can be a part of CASA's role and how you can bridge that gap between the parents, the doctor, the diagnosis, the school. And I'm going to work really hard to show you today not only how challenging it is for parents of children on the spectrum, but also how it can be mislabeled. They can be, considered behavior problems when they really just weren't evaluated properly. And it's a very important thing and very important for you as advocates to be able to identify that because it gets overlooked, it gets missed a lot. So we're going to start with something. I threw something last minute at them, so hopefully it works. But we recently made a little hype song for Caiden's Corner, and I'm going to show you guys just a brief second of it, but you'll see a little bit about what our goals are. So just listen to the words.
Yeah, this one's for Caiden, strong and true. Caiden's Corner, built for me and you. Inclusion's the mission, together we rise. Every kid matters, you can see it in our eyes. love is legit. Caiden's got heart, he's paving the way. Autism's his story, but it don't rule the day. Families united, we're stronger as one. Supporting the struggle, enjoying the fun. Inclusion's the mission, together we rise. Every kid matters.
That's only the first minute of it. The song's about 3 minutes long, but my son, Caiden, is extremely passionate about music. He's actually got a very keen ear in piano lessons, and it's so eye-opening to see their gifts. So of course, with him being so passionate about music, it just made sense for us to make a song. And you saw in there that was totally generated by AI, because obviously we don't have the mobile unit just yet, but that is our really big goal, is to be able to bring that to this area. Because we know, and you'll learn a little bit more about that today, but we know that the waiting list for ABA therapy, which is applied behavior therapy for children on the spectrum, and even children with like ODD and other disorders, is average 6 to 12 months on the Gulf Coast along all 3 counties. There's one facility that has over a 3-year waiting list right now. So we have a lot of children that aren't receiving the services they need to progress. We also know that early intervention before the age of 5 is crucial because of brain development. And if they're on a list for 3 years and they weren't diagnosed until they were 2, you can imagine they're not getting in before they're 5 years old. So they're not receiving the services that they should be receiving. And there's not a lot that we can do about that. There's not enough funding. There's not enough providers. But one thing that Caiden's Corner, our mission, is to bring a mobile sensory unit that we can bring to different areas while also educating parents on things they can do in the home. And that's foster parents as well, obviously, that they can do in the home while they wait on that list. Now, I did send a proposal to the state for a couple $1 million to build a facility, but I'm going to say they're probably not looking at it right now. And unfortunately, until that money shows up and that facility is built and we have more providers, that won't happen. So that is our big goal, our big campaign. If you know somebody that's, interested in helping support us fundraise for that, absolutely connect with me after. But now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. So they did tell you a little bit about me. You'll learn a lot more about me through this, but I'll go ahead and put that little medical disclaimer in there. I'm not a doctor. I'm not licensed in anything anymore. Everything you're going to learn from me today is from a parent's lived experience. But I have educated myself. I've made connections through the state. I've gone to Jackson, got in people's face, like, I need answers, help me out here. And sometimes it's good, sometimes not the best experience, but everything you're going to learn is from a parent's perspective. So it can be implemented and you can put yourself into that foster parent shoes and even the parent shoes, right? Because I know Judge Farr probably talked about this, but our goal is to keep families together. We're going to do whatever is best for the child, whatever keeps the child safe, but the parents probably need some education around this as well when the child is re-entered into the home. So with that being said, I'd like to start off a little interactive. I'm not going to make you do an icebreaker, but if you have a pen and paper, we are going to do some things. So if you'll take just a second to get that, and we're going to keep this interactive because I want you to be able to look back. One, I don't want this to be boring, an hour and a half of me just talking at you, but I also want you to be able to think back to cases you've had to be able to say, okay, maybe this makes sense now. So first, quick show of hands. How many of you have worked with a child or a family that's been touched by autism that you know for sure? That's a lot. That's a lot, right? How many of you have worked with a child where you felt they weren't diagnosed, but maybe we need to have them evaluated? Yeah, a lot, right? So I'll ask if anybody's willing to share, what was the hardest part of that experience? Anybody willing to share? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Nonverbal child? Yeah. Communication. Yes. Anyone else willing to share? Go ahead.
I've never worked with it on a case, but we have a relative that wasn't diagnosed, a male, and his behaviors became combative and it was a danger.
Yes, to himself and others probably. Okay. She's never had one in a case, but she's had a family member before whose behaviors became a danger to themselves and to others. Yes. Well, pre-adoptive state, that's awesome. For those of you that can't hear, she has had a child that's been in custody for 7 years now and been on waiting lists for around 3 years of that. So that's pretty extreme. Anyone else want to share? Yes, ma'am. She shared some progress that she has had with a student who has struggled, but recently was able to, write a word or type a word on their laptop. So we're seeing progress. and she's just excited about like what's going to happen next. So I want to start a little bit out here with a story that kind of shook me. Nia, okay, this is Nia. And she entered foster care at 14 years old. Okay. And she was very much labeled the problem. But what looked like defiance for her was actually sensory overload. And eventually she was diagnosed with autism, but she was bullied in one home. She went several homes. Okay. And you can search her. Got her last name there for you. But it was sensory overload. So imagine being punished for how your brain works, how your brain processes. And I'm super proud of her for speaking out and sharing her experience. But I want you to think about, have you ever seen a child's behavior as misunderstood? Maybe they were being defiant, but it was really about communication. And when you have a child that's considered, I referenced nonverbal, I'll go ahead and let everybody know correctness now is non-speaking. Hard sometimes when you learn terminology 3 or 4 years ago and now you got to relearn it. But the correct term is non-speaking because there are a lot of forms of communication, right? So nonverbal is not technically the term that's used any longer. But when you have a child that struggles with communication and they may not be vocal, how do we communicate with them? How do we get them to be comfortable with us? How do we understand what's going on? And I know that's something I struggled with a lot. So my son was considered non-speaking until about 5 years old. And I truly believe the only reason he became verbal, and he'll talk your head off now if he likes you. But the only reason he became verbal is because the intense amount of therapy that I put him in. And some doctors told me it was overkill. I was doing too much. I was going to burn him out. But for me, I knew that as a parent, I couldn't look back and think I could have done more. I should have done more. I should have pushed harder. And so he did around 40 hours of therapy, like a full-time job, from his diagnosis. Took us about 6 months to get him in somewhere after his diagnosis. So around 2.5, he started therapy, and he did about 40 hours a week of therapy until he was almost 6 when I put him in public school. And like I said, for a lot, that was overkill. But if you think about it, a child of that age usually goes to daycare from 8 to 5 anyway. So don't think he was, in a room tied to a chair. It was very interactive. There was sensory gym and sensory play, and he had breaks and naps, and basically his form of daycare is what it was. And he now speaks. We struggled with eloping a lot. For those of you that don't know about elopement, it's when a child wanders or run off. And children on the spectrum the statistics change every year, but 3 to 4 times more likely to drown than your average child. They're drawn to water because of the sensory. And it's the #1 leading cause of death for children on the spectrum. And you've probably seen in the news, there's been several drownings lately where a child got out of the house, found a pond, found a lake, found a ditch, and they've drowned. And this is something that we have to keep bringing awareness to, because I have seen several cases. There are cases where the parent just was neglectful. I can say that. I had every lock, every chain. I had alarms. I had everything I could. And my son still figured out how to get out of the house. If they want to, they will. If you have children, you know that. And so for me, that was very scary. And that's one of the reasons I put him through intense amounts of behavioral therapy so that we could work on him understanding safety. I mean, my biggest fear was he wasn't going to make it to 5 years old. And now Caiden is probably way more safety aware than my other children, and a little too much sometimes. He won't leave my side. So just keep these things in mind as you are observing your cases, as you are meeting with these children, and putting it back in perspective of, is this a behavior, defiant behavior, or is there some kind of stimulation? And we're going to walk through that today. So with that being said, I want you to think about, what could you have changed if someone had paused in one of those cases you've had previously of children on the spectrum and asked, like, what is this behavior trying to say? What could have changed if someone would have just stopped and said, what is this behavior trying to? And if anybody's willing to share, it's hard to think about what would have changed or what could have changed, right? But moving forward, we can always make sure that's top of mind. What is this behavior trying to tell us? So I probably jumped a little ahead of myself. That is my best thing to do. But who I am and why I'm passionate. So I've already told you enough about me. And again, you'll keep learning because everything I teach is from lived experience. What I really want to talk about here, though, is I am neurodivergent. Okay, so I am about as ADHD as they come, which is why I tend to get ahead of myself in some of these presentations. My husband is ADHD. My daughter is ADHD. My 19-year-old is ADHD. And Caiden, right in the middle, has autism. And he was diagnosed mild to moderate. There's levels now. So again, what I learned 3 or 4 years ago has changed now. But also thinking about this, when you are meeting with, how many of you do you meet with the biological parents? Maybe the child's not placed there, but do you meet with them? I challenge you, when you're meeting with these parents, and you've probably thought about this before because we have the whole nature versus nurture thing of like, well, that explains why the child's making this behavior because the parent's doing this or that. But I challenge you when you're meeting with these parents as well to think, is this biological in the parent as well? Maybe they weren't taught how to regulate. Maybe they weren't taught what behaviors and how to self-regulate and soothe. Maybe they're overstimulated. And we know, I'm not going to say the terminology, but you know what rolls downhill, right? So how often is this something that maybe the parent needed services or needs services right now for them to be able to self-regulate, to be able to parent their child? Because I can tell you right now, when me and my daughter are in the same room and we're both overstimulated, my husband gets in the truck. I'm out of here. And it shows up a lot. Differences. There are 7 different types of ADHD. I won't go through all of those today. You can Google that. Obviously, there's different levels of autism. And if you know one person with autism, you know one person. Every single child is different. They have different behaviors, different symptoms. And so it's really important when you are meeting with these parents. So I like to share that, my husband and I are both neurodivergent. And so we have to make sure we are regulated in order to be able to regulate our children. And so that is something to keep in mind as you're meeting with parents and even foster care parents. So, your role is really powerful, and you might be the one person that notices this. We know it gets overlooked, or kids and adults wouldn't be getting diagnosed in adulthood. There's over 15.5 million people in the United States right now that are diagnosed with ADHD, and over half of them weren't diagnosed until adulthood. So we know it's getting missed. We also know that the school is probably where a lot of this is seen, but the school can't forcibly have the child evaluated. They may tell the parent, like, kid can't come back until you have a doctor's note or something of that sort, but they can't bring the child there, not without some sort of legal action. And a lot of times parents are in so much denial, I can't be my child. Okay. There's so much stigma around ADHD. There's so much stigma around autism that parents don't want to do the evaluation. They don't want to know. And that's unfortunate, but that's human nature. You don't want to know the bad things, right? And it's not a bad thing. It's actually a beautiful thing. But I share that because you may be the one person who actually gets it for that child and who sees what's under that behavior. And so the difference between, that kid is out of control and that kid's nervous system is overloaded can literally change their life. It can change their entire trajectory. I know as a child, I was difficult, talked too much, questioned adults, right? I was smart, straight A's, top of my class, in all the sports, but I definitely wasn't the teacher's pet. I asked too many questions. And it's just because my brain processed differently. And I was labeled difficult. Look at me now. Being difficult in Jackson. I'm sure they're going to have facial recognition being like, she's coming. But I just want you to think about that, right? How we often label people. And whether what's going on in the news right now is good or bad for us as actual autism parents, we're happy there's attention around it because people are starting to understand. Okay. So I want to ask you again, how often do you see families that maybe were accused of neglect when they really might be drowning in systems that don't understand them? And let me elaborate before you answer that. But as a child with autism, there's about 9 different services in the state that I could deal with at any point in time. Division of Medicaid, division of rehab services, obviously first steps through the health department, social security services. There's so many. And if you've ever dealt with one of the agencies, it's not easy. It's not support. It is more like a scavenger hunt because everybody is blaming everyone else. You call this one. Oh, you need to call this one. Okay. You need to call this one. They're all understaffed. They're all underpaid. They're all overworked. Same thing with the school systems, Department of Education. So how many times have you maybe met with a parent or met with a family and thought, okay, maybe they just got dealt a bad hand or they're struggling to get the support that's actually needed. They're trying, but they can't get it. Does anyone have any comments on that? I'd love to hear share.
We have a case in our nation.
So she elaborated that she has a case currently that the mother is also autistic and she wants to help. She wants the resources, but she also has to keep the lights on and keep food in the house. And so at what capacity can she do both? And I'll tell you right now, they let you know in the beginning that, you know, I'm a business coach now. That's not how it started. When Caiden was diagnosed, I worked 45 hours a week, according to my contract. And when they called and said, hey, that we finally have an opening for occupational therapy, but it's at 11 on Tuesdays, there was no way I could physically get him from childcare, get to the facility, have the session, go back, drop him off, go back to work. There's just no way. And so I'm grateful that I had the resources to be able to take a risk, leave my, I just quit and said, you know, and I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I'm gonna figure it out. You know, I'm smart enough to do that. And it worked out for me. A lot of parents, it might not. Now I planned for that for 6 months. I made sure all our bills were paid, everything was paid in advance, you know, so that we could be there, but not everyone has those resources. And so that's valid. That's 100% valid. And the travel and the cost of the therapy and the cost of the gas and the fuel. When Caiden started, I told you guys earlier that he started very intense therapy. We did 40 hours a week. And the first facility that took him was called Spectrum House. They don't exist anymore, but they were at Keesler Air Force Base. To give you some context, I live off Kildalo Road, so I'll kind of exit 20. At the time, I drove a Yukon XL because I had a double jogging stroller, and that's the only thing that fit it in the back. Gas was about $3.99 a gallon. And so after 3 or 4 months of me paying somewhere around $1,000 a month for fuel to get him to Keesler, go back to work, back pick him up, drop him off and back, plus my copays. He sat on a waiting list for about 9 months to get approved for Medicaid. And I'll get to the waivers in a minute because children on spectrum can be approved for Medicaid no matter the parent's income. 9 months for that. So I was paying my private insurance copay, which was $45 a day because it's a specialist. Do the math. He went 5 days a week plus the fuel, about $1,000 a month. How many cases or parents do you know right now that could afford to do that? I couldn't afford to do that. I racked up so much credit card debt, it was crazy, but I wasn't willing to not do that. So I was in this era of I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Long story short, it came to a point where I said, I think if I bought a car, a little car, just to save the $600 in gas, that would help us out. So I sold my husband's Jeep while he was offshore. And I took that cash and I bought a little Malibu from some known side of the road. I'm like, I want this one. And that did help. I paid about $75 a week in gas but most parents can't do that. And so we eventually got him into another facility that got him approved for Medicaid, all of those things. But I just want you to keep that in mind of how difficult, how much of a scavenger hunt this really is for parents. And then foster parents trying to step in. Maybe they've never had a child on the spectrum in their care before. Now they have a lot to learn because our goal, I'm assuming this, when the court makes placement, I'm assuming their goal is safety. That's number one. That's key, right? We don't go out and interview everyone and say, who has, and I'm sure that they do look at that, but the odds of someone having training around working on children with the spectrum and having a spot open or being willing to take the child is probably going to be slim. So our number one goal is the child's physical safety and mental safety. But can they thrive there if the foster parent has no training around it? So just something to keep in mind. But as we move into this, you know, we've hinted around a little bit at this, but I want you to think about why this matters for you. Okay. So 1 in 36 children have been diagnosed with autism, and I anticipate that number is going to increase. We are screening earlier now, which is great. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but getting in before 5 years old is the most crucial years. And so they're now screening these children earlier. Caiden was diagnosed around 2. And thankfully, his pediatrician, it's funny because she'll tell you that everything she's learned about autism has been from me. She hadn't really had a child before Caiden that was in her care. And I was persistent. Nope. I mean, I was scheduling appointments every week. I'm like, this ain't right. And so she trusted me enough to do these early screeners. And thankfully, we were able to get him diagnosed early. But we sat on a wait list for months to get into UMMC to actually get the diagnosis. Insurance won't pay for anything until the diagnosis is done. You see how the support is falling apart again. So it's not rare for children to be on the spectrum, be missed, be undiagnosed. We talked about this a few minutes ago, and I'll give you a glimpse into this briefly. And you can look all of this up, but a child with an actual autism medical diagnosis qualifies for what they call the Katie-Beckett waiver in the state of Mississippi. Are y'all familiar with the Katie-Beckett waiver? Okay, so the child with a disability can qualify for the Katie-Beckett waiver, which gives them Medicaid insurance no matter the parent's income. It's only based on the child's income. So the child can't have more than a certain amount in a checking account. They can't own any assets, those types of things. But it's helpful. It's very helpful, because I told you a few minutes ago about my private insurance copay and the $45 a session. Not only did it help there financially, but they cut me off. Cigna said after 6 months of him in ABA, he's met his max coverage for this. Now, we're 6 months in. He's going to have autism for life. What do you mean? So we had no choice other to go the Medicaid route. There's also what they call an IDDD waiver in the state, which is probably what your case has been dealing with. So the IDDD waiver is for intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. And it follows people through their lifetime, so there's no age requirement, no age limit, but it provides everything that medical coverage does not. That helps keep the person out of institution, is how the language is written. But basically transportation to doctor's appointments, job coaching, if they need respite care, those types of things. There is a 9-year waiting list in the state of Mississippi for the IDDD waiver. To make it even better, you have to have an IQ under 70 in order to even qualify. So they limit it for people who maybe have a developmental disability, but aren't as intellectually disabled. So my son has an IQ of about 120, which is very, very smart. So he doesn't even qualify. And so, not to throw anyone under the bus, but I did question the Department of Mental Health in person in Jackson a couple weeks ago about this. I said, so you're basically telling me that my son is disabled, that's what the state calls him, but he's not disabled enough? They didn't like that, for sure. So I asked that question. I said, it's very, very common. Obviously, we talked about this earlier, but if you know one child with autism, you know one child, one person, adults too. Everyone's different. But it's very common for people on the spectrum to have a higher IQ. That also is part of the reason they struggle with communication, because their brain is doing this. So to slow down enough to have a conversation with you, and sometimes when they're non-speaking, it doesn't mean they can't speak. They're bored with you. They don't want to speak to you. It's as simple as that sometimes. But I asked them, I said, why are you limiting this? Because right now my son is, oh my God, he's going to be 10 next month, almost 10. There's a 9-year waiting list. So that means potentially he may get off the waiting list at 19. But you're already making the decision today at 9 that he can't even get on the waiting list. Just because he's brilliant on paper doesn't mean he'll drive one day. It doesn't mean he'll live on his own. It doesn't, and I hope he does. If you ask him, he's going to. He's ready to move out today. He can make a hot pocket. He can wipe his own butt. He's like, I'm moving into an apartment. But it's very common. And so my opinion and what they alluded to, okay, this is not documented anywhere, is that because they can't already serve the people that are on the list, we're not going to open the floodgates with anyone. That doesn't sound like support either. So keep that in mind. But I'm sure that's what your case is actually trying to do, is get approved for the waivers. Because as an autistic parent and then having an autistic child, that would be the support that she would need. So I want you to think about for a second, here on this slide, you'll see why this kind of matters, right? So you have maybe a child who can't testify in traditional ways because they're non-speaking. Maybe they use an AAC device, which is adaptive communication devices. I don't know if you've ever seen these, but there's a lot of different formats of them. The most common ones you'll see is maybe it looks like a laptop or an iPad. The child presses a button for a cup and it speaks for them. It says cup. So they'll do, and it'll say, I need a cup or whatnot. So that is a form that's used. You might have a family accused of neglect. Maybe it's due to misunderstood autism, behaviors, needs. You may have a teenager aging out. This is something we don't have enough services around in the state for sure, is the transition period. Now they do have facilities that are more like homes like that for people with disabilities, like communities. But there's less and less. They just closed another one. That's always what it comes down to, is money. Yeah. They also have some day treatment facilities. We've got some here on the coast. There's not enough. I just went to a meeting last month for an interest meeting for them to actually bring one to Hancock County. But if you have someone with a disability that maybe isn't for the traditional workforce, they would go to like a day treatment facility, and they do arts and crafts, and they go out and about. Maybe they learn how to do jobs. They do things around the facility. But in order to be in one of those, you obviously can't have a certain amount of assets. You can't inherit anything. If you're going to ask the state to pay for something, you can't own anything. And so there's also this push and pull there, which is, I won't go on that tangent, but we have to set up a special needs trust, because if I died tomorrow, my son cannot inherit his third of my house. And so they really do kind of put your back against the corner when it comes to, if you want to receive these services, you have to be dependent upon us, but you're going to wait 9 years. So it's a scavenger hunt for most. But for you guys, you might also have these parents that are navigating these agencies and they don't even know what's out there or what ways to support. So I challenge you as advocates to be that resource center. If you have a foster care parent or even, a biological parent, send them our way. We will talk to them. We will work with them. We will explain what agency does what, where they need to get started. But there are resources, and that's kind of why we're here today, is helping you understand when you know autism better, you can be a stronger, more effective advocate. So, as we said, 1 in 36 children. You can see the nationwide numbers there. But here is where theory kind of meets real life, because I want you to think of, again, a child you currently have or that you've had previously in your caseload, and think through the scenarios we just talked about. What might you have documented differently if you knew these things? Or how might you have explained this behavior to a judge or a social worker? Because it's your job to be the bridge, right? Bridge the gap. But how could you communicate with the child enough to understand those behaviors, to communicate that to the judge, social worker? I actually saw some on your table, which was super fun. But I brought a couple examples here as well, and we'll go through some of this. But there's a lot of tools you can use. There's a lot of different sensory tools. There's a lot of different tools. I saw some of these, the pop tubes, right? They're all the things that would annoy the heck out of parents. That's a sensory tool, okay? But when you are speaking with a child, maybe having a hard time for them to open up, maybe just have a few different fidgets in your bag. Sometimes when their brain is so focused on this, they're willing to just speak versus being shut down and being nervous. Another thing that you can use with them is called social stories. And so we actually partnered with CASA in our launch week and did some kindness kits. Has anybody actually used the kindness kits? Check those out. Because if you just had $10 worth of fidgets with you, you might get a child to open up. And this doesn't just apply to children on the spectrum. It can apply to any child. Every child loves these fidgets, right? It's a very simple solution. And again, it works with adults too, as well. When their mind is occupied, it's a lot easier for them to just flow. So again, child A, child B, child C. Okay, so we're going to do something a little interactive here. Child A, maybe they're nonverbal, as we talked about. They use AAC device, high sensory needs. They thrive with routine. I will tell you, all children thrive with routine, but especially neurodivergent children. If I tell Caiden, get your shoes on, let's get in the car, he is going to throw a fit until I tell him where we're going. There's no such thing as a surprise in my house. Okay, he will, I'm not going until you actually tell him where we're going. I have lied to him a couple times because I like to try to surprise them, but then he's mad because I lied to him. And that's not where you said we were going. He's angry. But routine. And we know, obviously, when a child is put into foster care, that routine takes a long time. There's probably very little routine. Your goal is probably to help them create a routine, but they've been uprooted. Now they're in a new home. That takes time to adjust, transition, and then maybe they get uprooted again. And so you could probably see why they're overstimulated. I mean, think about your morning routine, your daily things you do every single day. Second nature, you don't have to think about it, right? I get up, I kind of drag myself like this into the kitchen, turn my Keurig on because it's a total dinosaur and it takes like 5 minutes to warm up enough to make a cup of coffee, but I won't replace it because it is the oldest appliance in my house and I think it's good luck. But if I open that fridge and there is no half and half or no creamer because somehow I used all of it yesterday and forgot, I am like, my whole day is ruined, right? I mean, think about the small things like that that mess up your entire day. So little things like that. You get in the car, gas light came on last night. You're like, oh, I'll get it in the morning, which was a terrible idea. It always is. And then you turn it on and you're like, oh, I forgot. I'm going to be late. Ruined your whole day. Those are the small things. These children are dealing with a little bit bigger problems. So you can imagine why they struggle when their routines turn off. Maybe child 2, child B, verbal. Okay, so they speak. But maybe they struggle with social cues, which is very common of people on the spectrum. I know my daughter's neurodivergent. She's not on the spectrum, but she is ADHD. It is black and white to her. She does not understand. That hurt my feelings. Why? I said it. Why did it hurt your feelings? You know, like very black and white. Doesn't understand in between. Caiden, he's getting better, but he says what he wants, no matter it hurts your feelings, and he's going to walk away. Like, okay, that was hurtful, but I'll stick with it. They don't understand. They can't read the room, right? Can't read the room. Some can. Again, yes, ma'am.
Well, what?
Yeah.
He cusses you out or walks away. Do you just not say anything, or do you say,
no,
hey, that's not right?
Yeah. So I think the first thing for Caiden understands the difference between right and wrong, and most children do when taught. I will never ignore that. There is going to be a conversation. And he's going to be uncomfortable during that conversation, and he is going to be angry that we're having it. But there does have to be a little bit of compassion, because did he understand the entire situation? Could he read the room? Obviously, he cursing as a 9-year-old, which I'm not going to lie, we have already dealt with. He knew he wasn't supposed, and he's never cursed me out, but I've heard him say, oh, damn it, or, whatever. And we've had to have the conversation of, why? And that word's not appropriate. Well, why? Why are there words that are appropriate but not appropriate? It's just a word. So making him understand some words are not appropriate, but then also when he has raised his voice, making him understand you have to read the room, okay? You were a child, I'm an adult. But it's very difficult because he understands he's not supposed to yell, but he can't read the room of when it's appropriate to do that and when it's not. And so that is something that's really hard for them to understand. Yes, ma'am. When he gets in trouble? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He is empathetic. Now, there are a lot of children that are not on the spectrum that don't maybe understand empathy or compassion. Caiden does. He doesn't really care much about other people's empathy and compassion right now. But according to his blood work, we're also hitting puberty. So there's also that, which is another thing to keep in mind. At different ages, you're going to see different things with different children. And so if he is overstimulated and irritated and is been told no, okay, no, it's not iPad time, or no, we're not bringing the iPad, in church, then of course he is going to, he'll tell you first. He tries to use his words. I challenge him to use his words. So he'll tell you, I'm angry. I'm like, I understand you're angry, but it's still a no. Okay. It's not appropriate to bring that here. And so then when he thinks that you didn't hear him, because that's always his default, well, you didn't hear me, he'll then use a fist and say, I'm angry. Like, I got to show you. I said, I understand. I hear you. I know what you're saying, but it's still a no. And so then, depending on if that escalates, and it can, it very much can. But like I said, every child's different. So I've seen other children that would take that fist and it would turn into something more physical. We have not, is there wood somewhere? We are not at that point yet, but I am prepared for it. It could, as hormones adjust, and things could look very different. So continuing to draw attention to it. But back to the cursing, no, I would never ignore it. And that is maybe the difference between me versus other parents. I have witnessed and seen and worked with other parents that, well, he doesn't understand. Okay, Caiden does understand. I just told you a few minutes ago his IQ is 120. He gets it. Yes, it's easier, right? If I ignored it and walked away, it's easier, 1,000%. Yes. So it is something I've witnessed and, like I said, worked with parents a lot on. I will not allow him, and again, this is personal opinion and personal perspective, will not allow him to use this diagnosis as an excuse for behavior or for physically hurting someone. Can it be a reason this is challenging or difficult for us to work through? Absolutely. But no, you cannot disrespect someone or hit someone or bite someone and just say, well, I have autism, so I get to do that. That is my personal perspective. But I also know that it takes a lot more work with him to get him to understand not only why this is wrong, what the consequences look like if this is wrong. And impulsivity is another behavior when a child's overstimulated, because he's acted out before and then come back an hour late. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. All kids do that, but he's more prone to it. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I love that. Okay. What are some of the first signs I saw that made me have him tested? So, and I will plug this in here. I hope all of you guys will find us on Facebook after. I've got a QR code at the end of the presentation, but we are having a coffee and caregivers event for free. It doesn't cost anything on November the 1st. I'd love for any of you to come have coffee with us, or send, parents or foster care parents that just want to ask. But that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about. So for Caiden, covering the ears was one of the most obvious. Kill library. Yes, it'll be 9 to 12. Grit and Grime is going to supply our coffee. So for him, covering ears was an obvious sign. And even when it wasn't loud, a lot of times people think it's because it's too loud. His brain was too loud. It would be a very quiet environment, and he would, a lot of rocking, which is called stemming, a lot of flapping. So he would sit there and he would flap his fingers right in front of his eyes, 2 hands like this constantly. One of the scariest signs I saw was he would bang his head. Just sit there and bang his head like this on the window. Now, this is a pressure point, and so it was soothing to him. But I'm going, this is going to be brain damage. This is a problem. Obviously, the eloping. So I could not go to the shower, couldn't go to the bathroom, not without him tied to me, because he would use that as his exit strategy. And then regression. So he progressed normally. He actually walked around 7 months, which is really early and scary. But then he said probably 2 or 3 words. So we were on track. And then all of a sudden, silence. Stopped speaking, started refusing a lot of his favorite foods. So this just all of a sudden plateau. Right around 15 months is when that happened. And so I'm like, something's wrong. And at the time, I'm pregnant with a sister. So I'm panicked. I'm about to have another one. And then, already messed this one up. What's going on? I internalized a lot of that. But the banging the head on the window. And I had worked with some special needs children in college with the Special Olympics. So when I saw the ears, I think I immediately knew. But we will be talking at that event about early signs. The library asked us to come speak about that because they have the Excel by 5 program, the younger program. And then also we're going to do an open Q&A. So I want parents to come and ask any question, because it was about a year and a half into his diagnosis before anyone even told me about the Katie Beckett waiver we talked about earlier. So I spent that $1,000 a month not even knowing there was other options. It was about a year before someone told me that insurance would cover things like incontinence supplies or his Pediasure that I was racking up on credit cards. So parents don't even know what resources are available to them. And then child C, verbal special interest in trains. This is what we used to call Asperger's. They don't diagnose Asperger's anymore, but that's their reasoning, is that it's streamlined into level 1, 2, or 3. Yeah, Caiden would have probably been qualified Asperger's if it was a thing. They were in transition period when he was diagnosed, so he was diagnosed mild to moderate, which is that's a big gap. But now it's level 1, 2, or 3. It's a nationwide. It looks a little different in every state, because when it comes to federal laws, states can add, but they cannot subtract. So some states have additional. Is the Katie Beckett Medicaid waiver I talked about nationwide or just Mississippi? And every state's waiting list is longer, or, has differences as well. Yes, ma'am. Ooh, yes. So executive function is the way the brain processes, usually around dopamine. So we know in neurodivergent people, neurodivergent, for those of you that don't know, cover basically any brain difference. So ADHD is considered neurodivergent, ODD, OCD, autism, etc. That's all considered neurodivergent. Their brain processes dopamine differently. Typically with a neurodivergent brain, dopamine, we know in the body regulates everything from energy, focus, challenge, reward. So with someone with extreme executive dysfunction, they're going to have typically high highs and low lows. So maybe one day they're on it, they're interactive, they're socializing, they're killing it, speak from experience. And then there are days where they're a potato. That would be me. It's almost like I get to a point where my body runs out of dopamine and it doesn't matter what the reward is. Like I gotta rest. So for a child that's Asperger's, who, again, we don't diagnose that anymore, but they're verbal, they have super special interests, they can tell you everything you ever want to know about a train or space. Because their brain's moving like this and because of their high intelligence, they probably have extreme executive dysfunction, meaning they have high highs and they have low lows. Some common challenges across the spectrum, we've covered most of these, but obviously communication differences. Some kids actually speak, some kids don't, some kids use devices. Again, don't think that just because they won't speak to you doesn't mean that they can't. Very often I will challenge Caiden likes to answer in and I will very quickly tell him, no, we use words. You can use words, we use words. And he'll say, fine, no. And then he's angry, but doesn't mean that he can't. He just would rather not. And sometimes, honestly, it's because they're bored. There are studies that show people that are neurodivergent they're not distracted or unfocused just because they can't. They're bored with the situation. Yes, ma'am.
You describing yourself with your highs and your lows. How do you cope with that? Do you use any medication? I have a granddaughter you just described her, she's 28 years old. She's
Yes.
out.
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of times that's because if I'm coming into a situation, whether it be me working on a project, I'm going to give 180%. And then after that, you're depleted. Yes, I do believe in medication. So I am medicated. You're all welcome. But with that, even with the medication though, that regulates the dopamine. So that allows me to not have to struggle with the executive function. That doesn't always regulate or breathe into physical, but I would have her evaluated 100%. It doesn't hurt to be evaluated. A psychologist, if you wanted to have her evaluated for like ADHD, I would go to a pediatrician can evaluate it, but you would get a better answer from someone that works with the brain. Yes, sir.
So, I recently had a debate with somebody. I don't want to taint it. I want to question, like, the increase in the numbers, the 1 in 36. One person argued it's because of expanding the spectrum in diagnosis. One argued that it was due to other factors.
Vaccines, Tylenol, yeah.
Whatever. One I was going to ask, like,
My opinion?
yeah.
Oh, I'd love to give it. Without getting political, of course. He said that, he recently had a conversation. There was 2 different perspectives on this as far as the increase in autism diagnoses, and if that was due to external factors like Tylenol, vaccine, those types of things, or if it was due to, tell me this, expanding the spectrum. I'm not a medical doctor, so I won't give you my perspective on, I can say this is proven or not proven. I can tell you I took Tylenol with all of my kids, and I can also tell you that all of my kids are vaccinated, but a lot of your children probably are too, and a lot of you probably also took Tylenol. That's my perspective on that. But I truly believe that because we are screening earlier, we are finding it earlier. And so that could be the increase. I believe that's a big piece of the increase in numbers. We also know, and it's proven, that there are biological factors to it. So obviously, if we're finding it earlier, we're identifying it earlier, that's going to increase the numbers, but those people have children. And so that can continue to also increase the numbers. But I truly believe that the earlier screening is also the reason. It's not that it didn't exist years ago. When I was growing up, difficult, loud, talk too much, my parents, and they're amazing people, but people only medicated their kid if they were bad. So there's nothing wrong with you. You make all A's. No matter how much I was like, something's not right, or I thought different, or, So I think as times are changing, people are more open to the differences. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of piggybacking off of what he just said, I seen a video on a TikTok stating that, maybe like 20 or 30 years ago, when it was not being diagnosed, not being recognized as much, like the example they said is that, maybe somebody's weird uncle that used to get caught or be considered weird because he stared off a distance. He was labeled as weird or different or strange. well, no, well, maybe he was just hyper focused or
Exactly.
zoning or whatever. And
Yeah.
his method of
Yeah. And so now that we are educating ourselves and identifying a lot of the symptoms more, yes, people are being less labeled as weird and more, okay, medically, does this person's brain operate differently? Yes, ma'am. Ah, right. So honestly, conversation is going to be the biggest way to, and using your gut and your judgment on, does this child really understand what they're doing versus why they're doing it, or how, what this behavior is trying to tell us. I don't know what you guys can and can't do as far as recommending evaluations, but I would assume you could make a recommendation that the child at least be evaluated by a medical professional. I don't think that an evaluation can hurt anyone, because it can be pretty eye-opening, and it also, in my opinion, can help with the parenting of the child, and then also the behaviors of the child. If you have them evaluated and someone says, this child knows what they're doing, they're manipulating, and you confront the child with that with a medical professional, right? Calling that out. Sometimes that's what these kids want. They just want to be called out. I know that from my daughter, who's extremely ADHD. But then also, if you had a medical professional that says their cognitive reasoning might be delayed, they might not understand what they're doing. So I would say, I mean, obviously using your gut, and we're going to talk a little bit really quick about what this can look like. And then if you see anything on here, but an evaluation would always, I don't think it hurts anyone. And I'm going to say a medical evaluation, because for those of you that have ever worked with IEPs or maybe went to an IEP meeting, the school does evaluations, but they're not medical professionals. I don't mean that to be ugly to any educators or previous educators, but they're not. They can give you a perspective from in the classroom, but a lot of these parents, from what we're seeing in the conversations I'm having, their child might get an IEP. The reason behind their IEP is autism. That's not a medical diagnosis. That is what the school is categorizing that child as. Now, they can recommend the parent go get an evaluation done, but they can't forcibly make them. And so evaluation, but what this can look like, scenario one, that child has a meltdown during maybe a supervised visit. Don't assume defiance is poor parenting on the foster parent or the actual, parent themselves part. Let's ask that question. What is this behavior telling us, right? And so maybe consider things like sensory overload. Is there transition difficulty, communication frustration? Child can't either verbally tell you what they want, or they can't seem to explain what they're looking for. Scenario two, the parent seems maybe disengaged at meetings. This would probably be more for the biological parent, but I guess it could also apply to foster parents. Don't assume that they don't care, right? They're probably overwhelmed, especially if they're a foster parent with multiple kids, or even if they're a biological parent with multiple kids. Maybe overwhelmed by systems. Maybe they process differently. We kind of talked about that as far as looking at the parent, saying, man, could this have been they're dysregulated, or facing burnout. I can tell you right now, you talked about this a little bit about your case. It was a full-time job for me to find Caiden's services in the beginning, and it still is. Scenario three, the school maybe recommends removal or restraint. Again, not assuming the child is dangerous. Sometimes lack of support, accommodations aren't being implemented. I can tell you that for a fact. I'm going to a Mississippi Department of Education case on Tuesday. It's gone up. It's been escalated multiple times for a parent's rights being violated, and no one will acknowledge it. We're going to sweep it under the rug. A child's rights from IDEA law, which is the law that protects individuals in education with disabilities, being violated. As in the school, the child wears a tracking device because he's an eloper. It's court ordered by a judge. There's a divorce decree involved. And one parent wanted the child to wear it, one didn't. So the judge said the child's wearing it because he elopes. He has a history of eloping, and we need to make sure he's safe. And the school said remove the device or remove the child. Yeah, because their handbook says you can't have cell phones, and they record, and this device can also. It's nonsense. Nonsense. She is, and you can. With the Department of Education, who just failed a federal audit, so we're gonna try. She can take it all the way to Supreme Court. I mean, if it has to go there, it has to go. So when I met with Hancock County Youth Court and asked them, do we know how many kids in this system are on the spectrum? They can't give me exact numbers because a lot of kids don't have a formal diagnosis. And the only department in the state that actually will give you that information is Department of Education. And those aren't technically medical diagnoses anyway. So the numbers are skewed, but I will keep looking for that. So moving a little bit faster. Things you could do really quick. Courtroom, we've covered a lot of this, but I want to just make sure this was covered. Obviously, some triggers to know about: bright lights. I will send this presentation as well. If y'all don't already have it in your resources, I'll make sure you guys, they do. Perfect. But things to avoid: obviously loud noises, bright lights, fluorescent lights. Providing visual schedules, so they work really well with visual schedules. You know, picture, brush your teeth, a picture of get dressed, a picture of shoes. These are things that you can recommend to the foster parents and the biological parents for them to implement in the home. Parent perspective. So families are obviously navigating a lot of things. You being educated on those things and being able to support in those things. Everything from IP meetings, therapy appointments if the child is in therapy, insurance denials, okay, wait lists, judgment from people who don't understand, don't get it, don't know why the child's acting the way they're acting in public. So just being empathetic to that, not necessarily judgmental, and I know you all are, you wouldn't be in this room, but also as that bridge of resources, saying, hey, look, I noticed this. Let me point you or connect you with this resource. And I'm sure you're all amazing at that, but there are a lot of resources for children on the spectrum we can plug you into as well. Using clear, simple language when you're working with these children. Again, we talked about this. They don't always understand the gray area. So instead of saying, you know, using metaphors or trying to be nice, just be direct. That's usually the best way. Just be direct. Okay. Say exactly what you want them to do. I made that mistake. It's actually a whole little story in my book, but I made a mistake one time at Buc-ee's, and you know, Buc-ee's is super wild and crazy, and there's thousands of people there. And Caiden hadn't eloped in years, but I told him, get your candy, let's go get in the car. Like, we got to go, you know, it's loud and we got to get on the road. And he got his candy and went and got in the car. And so he was 5 feet from me. I turn around and he's not there. I shut the whole store down. The interstate was fixing to be shut down. Like, it was about to get wild in Alabama. I mean, I'm like a detective, right? Oh my gosh. Okay. It's been 9:53, 9:58. I'm keeping a timeline. I'm panicking. And I said, I told him to get in the car. And of course he stole the candy. He's sitting in the car and he's like, you told me to get in the car. And it was the whole thing, but I was scared to death. And he was too. He was scared too, because we weren't in the car. So why was he in the car? And so be direct, get your candy and come back to me. Then we pay for it. Then we get in the car, you know, so just be direct, respecting those sensory needs and, you know, connecting the families with resources. But some resources for you. So you should have, and again, you have a copy of this. We talked about most of it, so you didn't need to see my slides anyway, but you should have a resource there. If you scan that QR code, it'll give you a digital copy if you're like me and you're not a paper person. I would love if all of you would, you know, follow us on Facebook. We are putting out educational resources. Obviously, we have events that you can connect your parents to, or Instagram if you're an Instagram person. And then everybody should have a little happy from us. Yes, please wear, advocate, share support. So any major questions before I hand this over? Yes, ma'am. Yes. So, yes. So on this, and again, you can get the digital one if you scan it, but you'll see I've listed some trusted Mississippi organizations on there. Yep. And then we also are in the process of building a more localized resource hub as well. So just staying connected with us. And as always, you can send a parent to us, me and my board. We have, you know, medical professionals, OTs, speech pathologists. And then there's also me. No credentials other than Caiden's mom, but we would love to be that resource for them. So, yes, ma'am. Caiden's Corner MS, or if you're searching, it's Caiden's Corner. There is an apostrophe, or you can, if you just want the username, it's Caiden's, one word, no apostrophe. Do have an Instagram. It has almost no followers, so please hit that button.
Yeah, this one's for Caiden, strong and true. Caiden's Corner, built for me and you. Inclusion's the mission, together we rise. Every kid matters, you can see it in our eyes. From the field to the block, building dreams brick by brick. Caiden's Corner's here, and the love is legit. Caiden's got heart, he's paving the way. Autism's his story, but it don't rule the day. Families united, we're stronger as one. Supporting the struggle, enjoying the fun. Inclusion's a mission, together we rise. Every kid matters, you can see it in our eyes. From the field to the block, building dreams brick by brick. Caiden's corners here, and the love is legit. Minecraft worlds where the sky's the limit. Creativity shines and Caiden's right in it. Every child's voice, every laugh, every cheer. Caiden's corner stands strong, we belong right here. C-A-I-D-E-N corner. Inclusion, support, let's build it stronger. Good together we shine, no one left behind. Caiden's corner forever, community aligned. Inclusion's the mission, together we rise. Every kid matters, you can see it in our eyes. From the field to the block, building dreams brick by brick. Caiden's corners here, and the love is legit. Inclusion's the mission, together we rise. Every kid matters, you can see it in our eyes. From the field to the block, building dreams brick by brick. Caiden's corners here, and the love is legit.